Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a topic that I think is on a lot of people's minds these days: surveillance capitalism. Ever get that feeling? Like the internet just knows you too well. Like it's predicting your next move before you even know what you want.
Yeah, I think we've all had that experience at some point, right?
For sure. And that's the core of surveillance capitalism, right? Where our personal data isn't just being used to make products better, but it's actually the raw material for a whole system that wants to predict and even change how we behave, all to make a profit.
Exactly. And the thing is, it's often presented to us as, personalization or convenience. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that, oh, I'm getting this great service for free, but are we really? What are we actually paying with?
Yeah, that's the trade-off, and it's one we don't always think about. So for this deep dive, we're looking at Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. Really fascinating stuff. She kind of traces the roots of this whole system, how it's playing out in our everyday lives, and what we can actually do about it.
Yeah, Zuboff makes some really interesting points. One of the things she highlights is the role of Google. And it's kind of ironic because they started out positioning themselves as these champions of individual empowerment, kind of like what Apple did, appealing to consumers as individuals. But somewhere along the line, things took a different turn.
Definitely. And I think a good example of that is, remember when Gmail first launched and they started scanning everyone's emails to target them with ads? People were outraged, even though Google was trying to frame it as a way to make their product better.
Yeah, there was a lot of pushback.
It kind of felt like a betrayal of trust, in a way. And I think even Google's own chronicler, Stephen Levy, said something about them basically exploiting the situation to make money.
That's a pretty telling statement.
Yeah, and it brings up the whole question of how much data do companies really need just to make their products better versus, what Zuboff calls behavioral surplus, right? That extra data they're collecting that they don't actually need for the product to work. And that surplus, that's what fuels this whole surveillance capitalism machine.
Absolutely. And the scary thing is, it's not just our online activity anymore, right? It's spilling over into every aspect of our lives with all these smart devices.
Yeah.
It's like your fitness tracker, your smart TV, even your refrigerator could be collecting and transmitting data about you. It's like this constant digital observation, even in your own home.
It can be pretty unsettling, that's for sure.
Definitely. And the thing is, it's not always obvious what data they're actually gathering. Like, did you know that some fitness trackers have been found to be collecting information about people's sexual activity, menstrual cycles?
Wow.
I know, right? That
Yeah.
has nothing to do with fitness. And yet, this data was being shared with third parties. It makes you wonder where they draw the line.
It feels like the Wild West out there sometimes in terms of data privacy.
It really does.
And then there's the whole rise of voice data collection. Now our conversations, even the private ones we have in our own homes, are being recorded and analyzed. That example Zuboff gives in the book about the Samsung smart TVs that were recording conversations and sending them off to a voice recognition company. I mean, that's just creepy.
It is. It's like this blurring of the lines between what we consider private and what's fair game for data collection. It's almost like the very idea of a private conversation is disappearing.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think of Big Brother, always listening. Though in this case, it's more about profit, not necessarily political control, at least not directly. And that leads us to another interesting concept from Zuboff's book, the idea of instrumentarian power. So it's like this new form of power, right? And it operates through our digital infrastructure, kind of this giant big other, you might say, that's trying to predict and then control our behavior to basically guarantee certain outcomes.
Yeah, it's quite different from totalitarian power, which relies on force and fear.
Yeah.
This is much more subtle. It's like they're trying to nudge us in certain directions, shape our choices and ultimately our lives without us even realizing it's happening.
Right. And it's not just some far-fetched idea. Zuboff actually uses the example of China's social credit system.
Oh, right.
Where they're constantly monitoring and ranking people's behavior. That's kind of like a potential endgame scenario, right? Where instrumentarian power could be used to force conformity.
Yeah, definitely. And while we may not have a full-blown social credit system here in the West, you can see elements of it creeping in. Like, think about algorithms, how they're used to determine things like credit scores, job prospects, even who you're matched with on dating apps. It can get pretty unnerving.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like our digital selves are constantly being judged, and then that impacts our real-life opportunities and experiences.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It really is.
And it's not just theoretical. Like, companies like Microsoft are developing technology that's aimed at automating human behavior, even in the workplace. There's this example in the book about their collaboration with a Swedish manufacturing company where they're using AI to optimize worker efficiency. It makes you wonder what happens to human autonomy in a workplace when algorithms are calling the shots.
It's a big question. What does happen to our sense of self and freedom of choice in a world that's increasingly controlled by this instrumentarian power?
Yeah.
Are we becoming like cogs in a machine, our desires being manipulated for somebody else's profit?
It's something we need to think about seriously, that's for sure. And it's especially important for young people, right? I mean, they're growing up in a world where their lives are constantly being monitored and evaluated online, and I think that has a big impact on their mental health and well-being.
Yeah, Zuboff makes this really interesting comparison of Facebook to a social hive, where young people feel this pressure to constantly fit in, compare themselves to others. It's no wonder we're seeing rates of anxiety and depression on the rise.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
And this feeling of always being observed and judged, what Zuboff calls the viewpoint of the other one, can really damage our sense of self. It's like we start to see ourselves as just data points, not complex individuals with thoughts and feelings.
Right, we lose our humanity in the process. And it's not just a theory. I mean, remember that guy, Mikhail Kaczynski, the researcher who developed ways to predict personality traits just from Facebook data?
Oh, yeah.
He even said he was creeped out by what he'd created and the potential for misuse, by corporations and governments.
If even the people creating this technology are expressing concerns, that's definitely a sign we should be paying attention. Because this goes way beyond just convenience or cool features. It's about the nature of human experience in the digital age and what we're willing to sacrifice for it.
Exactly. And the stakes are incredibly high. Zuboff makes a really stark comparison. She says, just like how industrial capitalism exploited nature, at the expense of the environment, surveillance capitalism is exploiting human nature. And the price we're paying is our humanity itself.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
But the good news is there is hope. Zuboff also talks about the growing resistance to this system. The rise of things like privacy-enhancing technologies and regulations like the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. These are signs that people are starting to push back.
That's encouraging.
It is.
It does feel like we're at a kind of crossroads. Like, we can either passively accept a future where our lives are more and more controlled and manipulated, or we can actually fight for our right to privacy, freedom, and self-determination. But in order to do that, I think we really have to understand what we're up against.
I agree. Awareness is key.
Yeah.
We need to learn about how our data is being used and demand more transparency and control from the companies that are profiting from our experiences.
So what does this all mean for you? Well, surveillance capitalism has kind of become a part of our lives, often without us even knowing it. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. By understanding how this system works, questioning the trade-offs we're making, and demanding better, we can start to take back control and create a digital future that actually respects our humanity.
Exactly. This is a conversation we need to have with our friends, our families, our communities, even our elected officials. We need to demand more from the companies that hold so much power over our digital lives, and we need to take action to protect our privacy, our freedom, and our humanity. The future of our digital world depends on it. It really is amazing how embedded this whole system of surveillance capitalism has become in our lives. It's not something that just happened overnight, though, right? I mean, there were specific events and trends that really laid the groundwork for it to emerge.
Yeah, that's a good point. It feels like it's been this kind of gradual shift happening over years without us really noticing. I mean, Zuboff talks about how the early digital landscape, back when the internet was first taking off, actually had the potential to go in a totally different direction. Like, we could prioritize things like individual rights and social well-being, but somewhere along the line, we missed that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the key turning points that Zuboff points to is the aftermath of 9/11 and the rise of what she calls surveillance exceptionalism. Basically, in a wake of that tragedy, security became the absolute top priority, and people were much more willing to compromise their privacy in the name of national safety.
It's like we traded our long-term privacy for this sense of, immediate security in a way. Did we just fail to see the bigger picture of what that trade-off really meant?
It's hard to say. But what's clear is that it created this environment where companies like Google could really expand their data collection practices with very little oversight or public pushback. I mean, they were being seen as partners in fighting terrorism, even though their real motives, were more commercial than patriotic.
Right. So instead of using technology to actually build a more just and equitable society, we ended up creating a system that prioritizes profit and control over human values.
It's kind of a paradox, isn't it?
Mm.
And it wasn't just government surveillance that contributed to this shift. Zuboff also talks about a whole convergence of factors, like the decline of the public corporation, the rise of neoliberal market ideology, the weakening of regulatory frameworks. All of these things kind of created this perfect storm where companies could operate with very little accountability.
Yeah, it seems like a classic case of unintended consequences. We're only just beginning to see the full impact of those decisions now, all these years later.
Right. And it's not just a problem in the U.S. either. This is a global phenomenon. The reach of surveillance capitalism extends far beyond Silicon Valley.
Okay, so that paints a pretty bleak picture. What can we actually do about it? Is there any way to regain control of our privacy and autonomy in a world that seems like it's designed to exploit them?
It's definitely a challenge, but Zuboff believes it's not hopeless. She really emphasizes the importance of individual awareness and collective action. The more we understand how our data is being used and the more we demand transparency and accountability from these powerful companies, the more likely we are to see change.
So it starts with education then, like understanding how the system works, what's at stake, and what alternatives are out there.
Exactly. And then it's about taking action. Supporting organizations that are fighting for digital rights, pushing for stronger privacy laws, and choosing to do business with companies that actually prioritize ethical data practices.
It also comes down to the choices we make every day, right? About what technology we use and how much of our personal information we're willing to share. We have to be more discerning, weigh the trade-offs every time we click accept on a terms of service agreement or download a new app.
Absolutely. We need to support the development and adoption of privacy-enhancing technologies that actually give individuals more control over their data. I mean, there are so many brilliant people working on innovative solutions out there, but they need our support to gain traction.
It's actually kind of empowering to remember how people throughout history have fought against systems of oppression. Like, think about the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the environmental movement. They all faced incredible challenges, but they ultimately shifted the balance of power and made the world a more just and equitable place.
That's a great point. It shows that change is possible, but it takes sustained effort, a willingness to challenge the status quo, and a belief that a better future is attainable.
Yeah, and Zuboff argues that surveillance capitalism really poses this fundamental threat to democracy and human freedom. She believes we're at this really critical juncture where we have to decide what kind of society we want to live in. Do we want to just continue down this path where our lives are increasingly controlled and manipulated? Or do we want to reclaim our right to privacy, autonomy, and self-determination? It's a question that goes way beyond technology. It's about power, it's about freedom, and it's about the future of human society.
It's a lot to consider.
Sure.
But it's also incredibly empowering to know that we actually have a role to play in shaping that future. We're not just passive consumers. We're citizens, we're human beings, and we have the power to demand better.
All right, so we've spent the last couple deep dives, exploring the dark side of surveillance capitalism, I guess you could say.
Right.
And I think, I don't know about you, but I'm ready to get practical, what can we actually do to reclaim our digital lives?
Yeah, I hear you. Well, the good news is you have more power than you think. It really starts with awareness, like we've been talking about.
Right. Yeah.
But then it's about making informed choices,
Yeah.
and actually taking action to protect your privacy, your data, your autonomy.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then.
Oh.
What are some simple things people can do right now to start taking back control?
But one of the easiest and I think most effective things you can do is just pay attention to the permissions you're giving to apps and websites.
Oh, right.
When you get that little pop-up,
Yeah.
asking if you want to allow an app to access your location, your contacts, your camera.
Right.
Don't just blindly click allow.
Yeah.
Take a moment to think, does that app really need that access to function?
Yeah, I'll admit I'm totally guilty of just clicking through those without even thinking.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's become such a routine part of using technology.
It really has.
But it's important to be mindful,
Okay.
because those permissions can actually grant access to a surprising amount of information about you.
Really?
Yeah, and that data can be used in ways that, you might not be comfortable with.
Okay, so rule number 1, read those permissions carefully and only grant access if it's truly necessary.
Exactly.
What else can we do?
Another really simple step is to start using a password manager.
Oh, yeah.
This is a tool that will store all your passwords securely so you don't have to remember them all.
Right.
Or, worse yet, use the same password for multiple accounts.
Oh, yeah, that's bad.
I know.
I know I should be using a password manager.
Yes.
But I keep putting it off. It seems like such a hassle to set up.
I know it can seem that way, but honestly, it's really not that bad.
Okay.
There are so many great options out there, a lot of them free, and the peace of mind is really worth that small effort it takes to get started.
Okay.
Think about it this way. If one of your accounts is compromised and you've used that same password everywhere,
Right.
all those other accounts are now vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, you've convinced me.
Password manager, it is.
Right.
Okay, so what about all those smart devices that we were talking about?
Right.
Is there any way to use them without, constantly feeling like you're being tracked?
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those devices are designed to collect data as like a core part of how they work.
Right, yeah.
But you can take some steps to kind of minimize those risks.
Okay.
First, just do your research before you buy something.
Okay.
Look for devices with strong privacy policies and features that give you more control over your data.
So don't just buy the latest gadget on impulse.
Exactly.
Be a savvy consumer.
Exactly. Do your homework.
Okay, and then what? Once you have a device?
Yeah, so once you have it, just go in, explore the settings,
Okay.
see if you can limit data collection, maybe disable features you don't need or ones that make you uncomfortable.
It sounds like protecting our privacy in this digital age is almost a full-time job.
It can feel that way sometimes.
But I think the stakes are high enough to make it worth the effort.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the individual steps that people can take.
Right.
But what about like the bigger picture?
Yeah.
What needs to happen at a systemic level to actually create a more ethical and humane digital world?
Well, I think, as we've been discussing, we really need stronger privacy laws.
Yeah.
Ones that put individuals back in control of their data
Right.
and hold companies accountable for ethical data practices.
Yeah.
The GDPR, the one in Europe, is a good start.
Right.
But it's not enough. We need similar regulations in other parts of the world, including the U.S.,
Yeah.
and we have to make sure those laws are actually enforced.
That's, I guess, where collective action comes in, right? Like, we have to actually make our voices heard and demand that our elected officials actually prioritize this issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We also need to support the organizations that are on the front lines.
Yeah.
Fighting for digital rights, advocating for policies that promote a more ethical use of technology. There's some incredible work being done out there.
Right.
And these organizations really need our support.
It makes me think about, all the social movements throughout history that have had to fight for basic human rights.
Right.
The labor movement, civil rights movement, the environmental movement,
Yeah.
they all faced huge challenges.
Absolutely.
But they ultimately succeeded in shifting the balance of power and making the world a better place.
Yeah, that's a powerful comparison.
Yeah.
It reminds us that change is possible,
Exactly.
but it takes effort.
Yeah.
It takes sustained effort, a willingness to challenge the status quo,
Right.
and a belief that a better future is actually possible
Yeah.
and within reach.
So I guess if we want to reclaim our digital lives and actually build a more ethical digital world, we need to tap into that same spirit, right? Of activism, collective action.
Absolutely.
We need to speak up, demand change, support the people who are out there working towards that better future.
Yeah, and it's not just about, protests or lobbying.
Right.
It's about the choices we make every day.
Yeah. Right.
It's about supporting companies that align with our values.
Okay.
Using privacy-enhancing tools,
Yeah.
educating ourselves and others about digital rights.
It's about recognizing that we have agency. We're not just these like passive consumers.
Exactly.
We're citizens, we're human beings,
Right.
and we have a right to demand better.
When we demand better, when we refuse to accept the status quo, when we stand up for our rights and the rights of others,
Yeah.
that's when we create the possibility for real change.
Yeah.
We show the world that we won't be exploited and that we value our privacy, our freedom, our humanity.
That's a message worth amplifying.
Yeah, it really is.
It's time to reclaim our digital lives and demand a future where technology serves humanity, not the other way around.
Absolutely. This deep dive has been quite a journey.
Yeah.
We've confronted some pretty uncomfortable truths,
Right.
but we've also kind of glimpsed, a path towards a more hopeful future.
I agree. It's definitely been eye-opening, to say the least. I'm leaving this feeling more aware more empowered and definitely more committed to, actually doing my part, playing my role in creating a better digital world, one that actually respects our humanity.
We too. And that's what it all comes down to, isn't it?
Yeah.
Reclaiming our digital lives is about reclaiming our humanity.
Yeah, it's about shaping a digital future that actually reflects our values
Exactly.
and upholds our fundamental rights.
We encourage all our listeners to join us in this movement.
Yes.
Stay informed, stay engaged.
Yes.
And let's work together to build a digital world that works for everyone.
This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And to all of our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.